It started with a shadow, thin, sharp, and silent, sliding across the top of Ryan Mercer's fence. He looked up from his toolbox, confused. No wind stirred the trees, no birds circled overhead, nothing that should have cast a shadow so distinctly human-shaped. Then came the sound, a camera shutter. Click. Ryan froze, his hand still wrapped around a wrench. Someone was on the other side of his fence, leaning over just enough that their silhouette cut across his backyard like an uninvited guest. He stepped forward, heart thudding against his ribs, and the shadow flickered, pulled back, and vanished into nothing. But another soft click, faster and sharper than before, confirmed what he already suspected. Someone was taking photographs of his property. That was the moment Ryan understood something he had never considered before. Peace does not always remain peaceful. Sometimes trouble climbs right over your fence and invites itself in. Seconds later, Ryan reached the corner of his fence and stood completely still, listening. Footsteps retreated on the other side, slow, deliberate, almost smug in their rhythm. He pressed his eye to the gap between the wooden slats and saw her clearly for the first time. Linda Hargrave, HOA president from the neighboring community. Her phone was raised like a weapon, her expression cold and calculating. Her eyes scanned his yard with the intensity of someone inspecting evidence at a crime scene. She did not even attempt to hide what she was doing. She raised her phone again, snapped another photograph, and walked away without a single word, as though she owned everything her lens could capture. Ryan whispered to himself in the silence she left behind. Why was she monitoring his property? He was not even part of her homeowners association. But beneath the confusion, something else began to burn. A slow, simmering awareness that he was being watched, and he had no idea how long it had been happening. That evening, Ryan caught her again. He stepped outside carrying a trash bag, and there she stood by the fence, leaning forward with her phone practically inside his yard. He kept his voice steady, even as anger climbed his throat. "Can I help you?" Linda did not flinch. She did not offer an apology or even pretend to be embarrassed by her intrusion. "I am documenting irregularities," she replied flatly. "As HOA president, it is my responsibility to maintain order in this area." Ryan stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity. "I am not part of your HOA." Linda smiled then, the kind of smile that told him she knew that already, and simply did not care. "You live next to my HOA," she said, "and that is close enough."
She took another photograph right in front of him, then turned and walked away with infuriating calm, leaving Ryan standing in his own yard, feeling like a stranger on his own property. Something was deeply wrong with this woman, and she had no intention of stopping. The following days confirmed his fears. Linda appeared at random hours, early morning, midday, dusk, always near the fence, always pretending to check something, always with her phone at the ready. Sometimes she crouched low as though inspecting plants. Sometimes she leaned forward like she was adjusting an invisible boundary marker. And every single time, that unmistakable click echoed across the property line. It was harassment dressed up as civic duty. But more than that, it was a game Linda was clearly enjoying, and Ryan had no idea how far she intended to push it. He started asking questions around the neighborhood. Everyone had the same reaction when he mentioned her name. A sigh, a grimace, a look that said good luck without needing words. He learned the truth quickly. Linda had held her position for over 15 years. 3 families had moved away because of her. 5 others had filed formal complaints. None of the complaints ever stuck because she always claimed she was simply maintaining community standards. She had power, and she wielded it without hesitation. Ryan realized something else during those conversations. Linda was not taking photographs to enforce rules. She was taking them to assert control, personal, absolute control, and Ryan refusing to join her HOA had triggered her worst instincts. He knew he needed proof, real, undeniable proof, because Linda would twist anything he said against him. So one evening, under the dim glow of his porch light, he made a decision that would change everything. He opened his laptop, scrolled through security options, and stopped on one device that caught his attention: the SentinelCam S9. Military-grade boundary monitoring with motion tracking, angle logs, tamper-proof recordings, and a trespass counter that documented every unauthorized approach. He ordered it immediately. The package arrived the next afternoon. As Ryan mounted the camera on his fence post, the device emitted a soft beep. Motion detected. Boundary line breach. He glanced toward the fence, pulse quickening. Was someone already there, watching him install it? The real battle was about to begin. Ryan barely had time to pour his morning coffee before trouble arrived again. 3 HOA committee members stood at the end of his driveway like sentinels guarding territory that was not theirs. Their arms were crossed, their expressions rehearsed with practiced indignation. Linda was notably absent, which told Ryan she was orchestrating something larger from the shadows. Oliver Kent lingered in the background, pretending to check his phone, but Ryan caught the subtle warning in his eyes, a silent signal to stay alert. The tallest committee member stepped forward with manufactured authority. "We need to inspect your backyard." "For what?" Ryan asked calmly. "Violation reports." Ryan allowed himself a small smirk. "Interesting, because my camera says you trespassed here last night." Their faces tightened with sudden unease. They knew he was not bluffing. Deputy Carter Briggs arrived within minutes, his patrol truck kicking up dust as he pulled into the driveway. Ryan handed him the tablet displaying the SentinelCam log, timestamps, facial recognition markers, trespass alerts, all tied directly to the HOA committee members standing before them.
Briggs let out a low whistle. "That camera is sharper than most equipment at the sheriff's office." "Linda assumed it was just a toy," Ryan replied. The deputy informed the committee members they were being formally documented for unlawful entry. Any further trespasses would result in criminal charges. Their faces drained of color as the reality settled over them. But Oliver's expression was different, conflicted, almost guilty. As he walked past Ryan, he whispered urgently, "Linda is furious. She thinks you are hiding something. Be careful tonight." The warning settled cold in Ryan's chest. If the HOA was already this rattled, what were they preparing to escalate toward? Night fell heavy and silent. Ryan was finishing repairs on his back gate when a sudden flash burst over the fence. Bright, aggressive, invasive. He did not need to see her face. Her perfume betrayed her presence immediately. Linda snapped photograph after photograph, muttering to herself, "I will catch you breaking something. I will find one violation." But what she did not realize was that the SentinelCam was counting every single intrusion. With each flash of her camera, the trespasser number climbed higher. Ryan stepped calmly out of the shadows. "You know the camera logs every second of this." Linda flinched, then composed herself with a hiss. "You think the sheriff will protect you forever? The HOA has lawyers." She slipped away into the darkness before he could respond. For the first time, Ryan sensed something had shifted. She was not just being intrusive anymore. She was becoming desperate. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. The next morning, Oliver waited in his truck across the street. Engine idling, sunglasses hiding his expression. "Get in," he said. "We cannot talk out here." Ryan hesitated, then climbed inside. Oliver drove 2 blocks to an empty community park and stopped behind a cluster of trees. "I need to tell you something," Oliver said, gripping the steering wheel like it might escape. "Linda is not just trespassing. She has been digging through old HOA records trying to find any legal loophole to file a nuisance lawsuit against you." "For what exactly?" Oliver laughed bitterly. For existing. Ryan absorbed the information slowly. Why are you helping me? Oliver exhaled shakily. Because I am exhausted from pretending she is right, and tonight she is planning something with the full committee. Watch your cameras closely. That final warning carried weight Ryan had not expected. Oliver's voice was not worried, it was genuinely afraid. At 12:47 in the morning, the SentinelCam pierced the silence with a priority alert. Multiple motion detections, unauthorized presence, confirmed. Ryan threw off his blankets and sprinted outside, his bare feet slapping against the cold porch. Shadows moved behind his fence, low, quick, coordinated. He pulled up the camera feed on his phone and watched the scene unfold in real time. 3 HOA members were scaling the far corner of his property. Linda stood behind them, directing their movements with a flashlight beam. One of the figures carried bolt cutters that glinted in the moonlight. They were not there to spy. They were there to break in. Ryan dialed the sheriff's office with trembling fingers. Deputy Briggs answered, his voice rough with interrupted sleep. Already on my way. Your system flagged this as criminal intent and sent an automatic alert. Ryan stared at the live feed, his pulse hammering in his ears. The trespasser counter climbed steadily. 56, 57, 58. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was a full-scale invasion of his property, and the evidence was recording every second of it. When Briggs arrived, he kept his sirens dark, but his demeanor left no room for negotiation. Linda and her team froze mid-action, caught like thieves with their hands in the register. Briggs swept his flashlight directly into Linda's face, and she squinted against the harsh beam. You are on private property without permission, he stated flatly. Again. Linda scrambled to recover her composure. Her voice climbed an octave. We were investigating a potential code violation, standard procedure. Briggs did not blink. On private land, in the middle of the night, with bolt cutters? Ryan stepped forward and held out the tablet, the recorded footage playing clearly on the screen. Linda's mouth fell open as she watched herself directing the trespassers, her flashlight sweeping across his yard, her voice audible giving orders to cut the fence. There was no explanation that could save her, no spin that could undo what the camera had captured. Just proof, undeniable and absolute. Briggs spoke slowly, letting every word land with deliberate weight. One more incident like this, and I will personally place you in handcuffs. Do you understand me? Linda did not respond verbally, but her eyes burned with humiliation and fury. And beneath that, Ryan detected something far more troubling. A cold, calculating intent that suggested she was already planning her next move. The war was far from over. It was only beginning to reveal its true nature. The next morning arrived wrapped in an unsettling stillness. Ryan stepped outside and immediately noticed his mailbox hanging open, letters scattered across the driveway as though someone had rifled through them with careless hands. Ryan opened the gate, and Oliver stepped through like a man entering forbidden territory. She is not just obsessed, Oliver said, his voice barely above a breath. She is terrified. Of what? Oliver's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Losing control. Losing the HOA presidency. Losing the image she has spent 15 years constructing. She believes that if she can expose you as some kind of rule breaker, the board will trust her again. Ryan studied him carefully. Has she actually lost them? Half of them, Oliver admitted. They know she has gone too far, but the other half are too scared of her to speak up. Ryan noticed something significant in Oliver's manner. He was not simply delivering warnings anymore. He was offering confessions, slowly extracting himself from Linda's orbit, one truth at a time. Before slipping back through the gate, Oliver added one final piece of intelligence. She is planning something major
at tomorrow's HOA meeting, and you are the centerpiece of it." Ryan's pulse slowed with grim understanding. Whatever Linda was preparing, it was not going to be subtle. Ryan entered the community hall expecting resistance. What he walked into was a carefully staged ambush. The room fell silent the moment he appeared. Every HOA member sat rigid in their chairs, papers clutched in their hands, eyes locked on him like jurors studying a defendant. Linda stood at the front of the room, behind a podium, a thick binder displayed prominently before her with a label that read, "Ryan Mercer, Community Incident Report." She began flipping pages with theatrical precision, then launched into her presentation. Trespass counts that actually documented her own visits to his fence, noise complaints that had been fabricated from nothing, fence code violations that did not exist in any legitimate regulation, privacy infringement accusations regarding his security camera. It was performance art designed to paint Ryan as a dangerous outsider threatening their peaceful community. Every accusation was delivered with polished conviction, rehearsed to perfection. But Linda had miscalculated one critical factor. Ryan had not come alone. Deputy Briggs pushed through the back door with timing that seemed almost choreographed for maximum impact. "Interesting presentation," he announced to the room, "because my official reports tell a very different story, including documentation of Linda Hargrave trespassing on private property over 50 times. Murmurs rippled through the seated members. Several recoiled from Linda as though seeing her clearly for the first time. Others glared at her with expressions of betrayal and dawning realization. Her entire narrative collapsed in the span of seconds. Linda's jaw clenched visibly. Her fingers gripped the podium until her knuckles whitened. Her eyes locked onto Ryan with an intensity that suggested she viewed him as having stolen something precious from her. But instead of crumbling, she smiled. A calm, unsettling smile that belonged on a different face in a different situation. She was not finished. She had something else planned, and that smile promised it would be worse than anything that came before. Later that night, Ryan sat in his living room trying to process what had happened when the SentinelCam chimed with a piercing alert. Priority notification. Boundary breach detected. Unknown object, high-risk classification. He rushed outside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Something glowed faintly near the back gate, pulsing with a soft electronic rhythm. He approached slowly, his breath shallow. It was a small metal device, wired and blinking, not an explosive, but a signal jammer. The kind specifically designed to disable security cameras and create blind spots in surveillance coverage.
Someone had planted it on his property. Someone who knew exactly where his cameras could and could not see. Someone who wanted the system disabled long enough to act without being recorded. Ryan's stomach tightened as the realization settled over him. Only one person had studied his camera positions closely enough to know the vulnerable angles. Linda. He pulled the device from the ground and examined it in the dim light. As he turned it over in his hands, a second alert pinged on his phone. Motion detected. 3 figures approaching from the east perimeter. The trespass counter jumped to 72. Something significant was coming, and it was coming fast. Ryan activated the floodlights. Brilliant white beams exploded across his yard, exposing the intruders with merciless clarity. 3 HOA members froze mid-stride, caught completely off guard. In the center of the group stood Linda herself, shoulders tensed, eyes wild with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Turn off those lights," she screamed. "You were violating HOA nighttime glare regulations." Ryan stepped forward calmly, holding the signal jammer device where she could see it clearly. "You planted this. You tried to disable my cameras so you could operate without being recorded." She did not deny it. Instead, she moved closer, her entire body trembling with barely contained fury. "You think you can humiliate me, undermine my authority, ruin everything I have built?" Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from the weight of obsession finally fracturing under pressure. "You did not belong here. You do not respect the rules. You are destroying this neighborhood." Ryan held her gaze without flinching, his voice steady and measured. "You are destroying yourself, Linda, and you have been doing it for years." The flash of Deputy Briggs' patrol lights appeared at the end of the driveway. Linda turned toward the approaching vehicle, and Ryan watched something fundamental break behind her eyes. It was not fear. It was the dawning recognition that her carefully constructed war was collapsing around her, and she was not prepared to accept defeat. Briggs stepped out of his vehicle and shouted across the yard, "Everyone stay exactly where you are!" But Linda did not move. She did not attempt to flee or offer excuses. She simply stared at Ryan with an expression that communicated a single, unmistakable message. This is not over, not even close. The next morning, Linda's chest heaved as she stood before the assembled group, the SentinelCam logs displayed on Ryan's tablet for everyone to witness. Every trespass was documented. Every photograph she had taken over his fence was time-stamped. Every violation of his property rights was counted and cataloged with military precision. The HOA members who had faithfully followed her for years now shifted uneasily in their positions, avoiding her gaze. The power she had wielded for so long was evaporating in real time, and everyone present could feel it happening. "You think this proves anything?" she hissed, her voice stripped of its usual authority. Briggs shook his head slowly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No, it proves everything. Stop pretending otherwise." Ryan remained silent, allowing the evidence to speak on his behalf. He did not need dramatic words or emotional appeals. The law, the technology, and the camera had already made his case. Linda's final stand was loud and theatrical, but the outcome had already been decided. Oliver Kent stepped forward from the crowd, finally breaking the silence he had maintained for too long. "Linda has been abusing the HOA for years," he stated clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. He handed Briggs a small binder filled with records, internal complaints, trespass documentation, private memos that revealed the full scope of Linda's obsessive monitoring of neighbors throughout the community.
Linda's jaw dropped as she watched her own vice president deliver the evidence of her abuse. The allies she had counted on had vanished. The loyalty she had demanded had crumbled. Even within her own ranks, her control had slipped away without her noticing. Ryan felt vindication surge through him, but he maintained his composure. The story would not be complete until justice was formally and officially served. Deputy Briggs raised his voice so the entire assembly could hear. "Linda Hargrave, you are in clear violation of trespassing laws and harassment statutes. Your documented attempts to tamper with security devices and intimidate a private property owner will be officially reported and legally processed. Consider this your final warning before criminal charges become inevitable." Linda's face drained of color, but defiance still flickered in her eyes. "You cannot do this. You will not get away with this." Ryan stepped forward one final time and displayed the complete SentinelCam archive. Every breach, every photograph, every attempted interference with his property compiled into an irrefutable record. Briggs nodded with grim satisfaction. "This is court-ready evidence. One more violation of any kind, and charges will be filed immediately." The power dynamic had reversed completely. Linda's reign over the neighborhood's perception had ended. Her authority existed only in her own mind now, a delusion she could no longer force others to share. The next morning arrived with an unfamiliar quality: genuine peace. Ryan stepped into his backyard and felt the absence of tension, like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. No shadows crept along the fence line, no footsteps whispered through the grass, no camera shutters clicked from hidden positions. The SentinelCam blinked calmly on its mount, a silent guardian that had fulfilled its purpose. Even the HOA members who had once gathered to whisper and stare kept their distance now. They walked past his property without slowing, their eyes fixed forward, their judgment reserved for someone else entirely. Linda remained invisible, sequestered behind her closed blinds, a fading figure whose obsession had finally consumed everything she valued. Ryan drew a deep breath and held it, savoring the sensation. He could live normally again for the first time in weeks. The constant vigilance could finally relax. The battle was over. Ryan Mercer arrived that morning carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a knowing smile. Ryan's sister had followed the situation from a distance, and now she came to witness its conclusion. "Looks like the neighborhood learned something," she observed, handing him a cup. Ryan laughed softly, exhaustion and relief mingling in his chest. Technology wins sometimes, law wins other times, but patience wins everything eventually. They sat together on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the quiet street. No shadows, no surveillance, no harassment disguised as community standards, just peace, earned through evidence and persistence. Inside her house, Linda stood at her window, blinds half drawn, staring at Ryan's property with hollow eyes. Her binder of complaints and fabricated violations lay untouched on her desk, now worthless. The committee members who had once followed her without question were watching her now, wary, suspicious, waiting for her next mistake so they could distance themselves further. She realized something that morning that she had never considered possible. Her obsession, her control, her carefully maintained authority, all of it had been dismantled by evidence and quiet strategy. A man who simply wanted to live peacefully on his own property had defeated her completely.
For the first time in 15 years, she felt genuinely powerless, and the feeling was unbearable. Ryan walked slowly through his backyard that afternoon, conducting a final inspection while the SentinelCam maintained its silent vigil overhead. He spoke aloud to no one in particular, giving voice to the lesson the ordeal had taught him. Power can be loud. It can be obsessive and controlling and convinced of its own righteousness. But proof speaks louder. Patience outlasts aggression. And the law, when properly invoked, protects those who respect boundaries rather than those who violate them. Boundaries exist for a reason. Respect them, or eventually, someone will ensure they are enforced. The camera blinked one final time, its counter frozen at 72 documented trespasses. 72 instances of boundary violation, each one recorded and preserved as permanent evidence of one woman's refusal to respect the limits of her authority. The sun settled low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, shadows that no longer carried threat or menace. Peace had been restored. Justice had been served. And Ryan Mercer could finally enjoy his property without wondering who was watching from the other side of the fence.